Hey guys, Spence here. So, Galak-Z. This game was made and released by 17-bit Games, and was released on the PlayStation 4 back in August. For one reason or another, the PC version didn't show up until the end of this October. But that's neither here or there, so in this roguelike space shooter, what exactly is going on in Galak-Z? So in this sector of space, you play as ATAC, a fighter pilot who barely avoided getting exterminated along with the rest of his fleet, having escaped with a special prototype ship. Very quickly meets up with Beam, a commander of a cruiser, and the two basically team up, and now it's up to ATAC with his new ship to save the universe from the Imperials. The story itself is not deep, but it is enjoyable, mainly because of the interactions between ATAC and Beam, and because some of the generic anime stuff they have happening, like hiding the fact that ATAC's ship is special quote-unquote for the first few levels.
You've made me risk my life for a mercenary,
Worth it.
run errands for your ship,
For survival.
lied to me about White Tusk.
I am sorry about that one.
But in short, there really isn't much to say about the plot without dipping into the presentation. It's enjoyable, but not the sort of thing you'd be playing the game for solely. Now when it comes to controls, that's where most of the challenge in the game comes in. In your ship form, you have your basic infinite lasers, and lock-on missiles that you have a finite amount of, and a juke maneuver you can use to dodge incoming fire. Then, after you beat your first season's worth of stages, you get your robot form, like you're in Macross or Robotech. Here you have a laser sword you use for melee attacks, a grapple arm to grab objects and enemies to either throw it at other objects and enemies, or to take your aggression out a bit more personally, and a shield you can use to block frontal attacks until a point. And lastly, there are the thrusters, which are the same for both forms. You have your frontal thrusters help you get around, your reverse thrusters help you get around backwards, your side thrusters help you get around sideways, and a booster to help you get around even quicker. Mind you, as opposed to normal space sims, you can't use inertia to get around. Instead, you'll slide to a stop, so it feels more like you're maneuvering underwater, or on the surface of ice, depending on how you look at it. In any stage or episode, you'll have an objective that you will have to complete the episode or stage. These objectives are usually something on the lines of destroying certain enemy types, collecting items like crystals, or collecting items like data cubes that you can only carry in the robot form. And making this difficult besides the controls and the environment are the enemies. Fighting the enemies in the game is actually pretty darn fun, though it tends to be intense because any given fight can be your last, because small mistakes can easily spiral out of control. Also, new enemy types are introduced at a very good pace, and they are reasonably varied. Some enemies will have 360 shields, some enemies will have frontal shields, some will have normal lasers, others will have shotgun lasers, and there's even an enemy type that doesn't even attack you, but calls over other enemies. Combining the two different ship forms and the movement system makes for a game that's very involved. Even getting around can be dangerous as there's more than plenty of hazards around, such as spikes, aliens lying in wait, electrical equipment that will fry your shields. Then there's combat, which when you first start, any given fight could be your last. And then add that with the hazards and the different movement systems and the two different robot forms, and it makes for a game that's pretty darn difficult. While all the systems are very involved and you do have to be on the lookout for everything, because of this you feel very satisfied when you do succeed, and whether it's in skirmishes or just utilizing the environment to your advantage. Because guess what? Those environmental hazards? Every single one of those can be used to your advantage too. Throwing enemies into spikes, throwing electric equipment into enemies to fry their shields, going slowly to sneak past enemies, and even using debris to hide from enemies' line of sight for sneak attacks. All these can be used to your advantage, so mastery over the system rewards the player, and just generally makes gameplay a very satisfying part of the experience, though it is a learning experience, so expect failure more than once. Then there are the actual roguelike elements, which manifest in different ways depending on which mode you choose, arcade or roguelike. The game is split up into 5 seasons, and each season has 5 episodes or stages, and within any stage you'll find plenty of pickups such as upgrades for your laser, which can have multiple different properties, extra missiles, upgrades for your ship to increase its max health or shields, and salvage, which before any stage you can exchange for more equipment. In arcade mode, it saves after every stage you beat, and if you happen to die, you'll start back just before you started the level, with the same salvage and equipment you had before you went in. Meanwhile, on roguelike difficulty, if you die during a season, you'll have to start the entire season all over again. I would not recommend starting the game on roguelike difficulty unless you really like trial and error. This makes for a game that's as brutal as the game over screen, but incredibly satisfying to play, especially since the game is not out to get you, quote unquote. It won't just spawn a massive amount of enemies that you won't have any foreknowledge about ahead of time. It won't just put traps in places that there weren't traps before. If the player dies, it falls on the player almost all the time. Maybe you weren't strafing effectively, maybe you weren't prioritizing the right enemies with your missiles, maybe you just didn't master the movement controls, maybe you didn't utilize the environment, and maybe the environment just killed you instead. All these things the player must consider, and with every defeat, the player learns a new way to die and a new way to avoid dying. And in general, like I've been echoing, It's very difficult, but very fun. Presentation-wise, you can tell a lot of care and dedication went into the visual presentation of the game. I'll admit, there are some parts that don't look exactly the best, but a lot of the other aspects of the game definitely shine through. The shell-shade style of the game, the one-liners shot off between ATAC and his enemies in combat, how enemies' bullets are easy to identify, the cockpit view of ATAC, and the nice little ending sequences for after you beat a season. All this helps to harken back to a time before the commonality of the internet and how you could only really find anime on VHS tapes and TV. And with a frame rate that goes beyond 30 and resolutions that go to 1080 and 1280 and beyond, the game succeeds visually. On the sound front, the sound effects sound nice and definitely adds to the whole sci-fi aesthetic, though when it comes to the soundtrack, it's very A lot of the music in the game is very ambient and not the kind of ambient that stands out to me. There are some tracks that are catchy and that I actually like, but those are few and far between. They have a Bandcamp so you can actually listen to the soundtrack and formulate your own opinion, but for me, the music is okay. And that's Galak-Z. Would I recommend this game? Yes. $20 might be a bit much, maybe $15, but frankly, you get a very good two-dimensional shooter that's fun, hard, and rewarding all at the same time. The main issue I have with the game is that the difficulty can be kind of overbearing at times. But that's really just because a lot of the roguelike elements tend to be really tame, so the game has to be really difficult as opposed to you finding difficulty with the randomness of the scenarios you be in. But because of this intentional and very well directed difficulty, it works for a game that you will learn and eventually master as you play it. In conclusion, a very good two-dimensional space shooter that is fun, difficult, and rewarding, and definitely aimed at you if you happen to be into two-dimensional shooters, space sci-fi, giant robots, and anime, though namely of the giant robot variation. But, as I said, I recommend it, though a little pricey, but I still recommend it.
I'm here with the data cube.
Bringing you in.
Hello again, thanks for watching. If you happen to like this sort of content, drop a like, comment, subscribe, and maybe tell a friend who'd also be interested in this sort of content. In the meantime, you can click on the left annotation to see the last video I did on Samurai Warriors 4, 2 for the PC. On the other hand, if you want another sci-fi twin-stick shooter but with no roguelike elements and a lot more destruction more frequently, I recommend looking at Assault Android Cactus. You can click on the right annotation and get my opinion on it there.